Hello and welcome. I am Brooke Clement, Director of the Gerald R. Ford Presidential Library and Museum. And it is my pleasure to welcome you to this evening's program celebrating the opening of our new feature exhibit, Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel, the exhibition. I'd like to give a special shout out to our exhibitions team at the museum here. Many thanks to Deputy Director Joel Westfall, Curator Dr. Morel Lukey, Exhibit Specialist Bettina Cousineau, Registrar Noel Ward, and Museum Technician Sarah Zabriskie for their tireless work and perseverance to make this exhibit happen. Thank you. Thank you. This exhibit is a SEE Global Entertainment Exhibition, and I'd like to thank Martin Bialis, CEO of SEE, for being here tonight as well. We could not have brought this exhibit to Grand Rapids without the support provided by the Gerald R. Ford Presidential Foundation. I would now like to welcome Gleaves Whitney, Executive Director of the Ford Presidential Foundation, to introduce tonight's speaker. Gleaves?
Thanks very much, Brooke. Yes, an event like tonight's and the ability to bring an exhibit here takes a huge team of talented, dedicated people. And I'm so proud that we have a great partnership with Brooke and her team. They've done a great job. I was going upstairs. I could not contain myself today. I just kept going upstairs and watching as the installation was taking place. And the precision and everything that they were doing was just wonderful to watch, really an inspiration to bring this incredible exhibit to you. So it's really, I think, a personal commitment to this that makes these events so successful. So thank you, Brooke and your team. Yes, the question I've gotten again and again is, what is the Sistine Chapel doing in a presidential museum? I mean, what's the connection? Shouldn't it be at the Graham or out in Meyer Gardens or something like that? No, it belongs here. Just think about it. If you just think for a minute, President Ford actually and Mrs. Ford lived in a museum when they were in the White House. The White House, there have been whole books written about the White House as an art museum. It is truly, it is a respectable art museum in and of itself. And of course, Mrs. Jacqueline Kennedy did so much to refurbish the art and architecture of the White House, so you know it has this rich heritage that's known from around the world. But also, President Ford, soon after he got into office, within the first year, went over to Italy, to Rome. He met with the Pope, so Pope Paul VI, and he discussed, the conditions of the world, the importance of upholding the values of the free world. That's what we called it back in those days, in the 1970s and 80s, the values of the free world. What were those values? They were the values of freedom of expression and all of the things that this exhibit, when you go up there and you look at the values that are portrayed, the fact that it will take our legacy, 3,000 years of history, and it brings it to you in a wonderful format. Now, we're just talking to Martin Bialis, and he's presided over this in China as well. And of course, the labels in China change. They're not like the labels you're reading here, because it is a different experience in China. So those are the values of freedom and search for truth, goodness, and beauty that this museum, that President Ford, Mrs. Ford upheld, and that's why it belongs right here. So it's really a privilege, and it is the largest, Brooke, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it is the largest exhibit, traveling exhibit, which has come in the 40 years of this museum's existence. Is that not true? The largest. Isn't that great? You know, when you have a large exhibit with large ideas, with large images, overpowering images, I think you need a keynote speaker to kick it off who is a large-minded human being, a very special kind of person who has the ability to bring the content and the background of this exhibit to a broader public. It's my privilege this evening to be able to introduce Dr. Jeffrey Polet. Jeff and I are good friends. He is somebody that I'm very proud to be able to introduce tonight. This is the first opportunity I've had to introduce him to an audience since he has joined our team at the Gerald R. Ford Presidential Foundation. So we're really proud to have him on board, and he will be the director. He's leading up the Gerald R. Ford presidential, it's the Ford Leadership Forum, in which we're going to convey the ideas that President and Mrs. Ford projected and the ideas that are represented in this exhibit to a rising generation of people. So Jeff is somebody we're going to be working very closely with. We're so proud to have him. We stole him from Hope College. He had not retired yet, and all the people at Hope, they glare at me when I say it, but we were able to bring Jeff over, and he's been doing wonderful things at Hope for 17 years, I think, and he's really informed generations of young students. Some of those students are here tonight, by the way, in the audience. And now he's going to work that same magic, expanding the minds and the spirits of a generation of students who will be in the Ford Leadership Forum. We're so eager to have him. You know, as I was walking through the exhibit and I saw these images this morning going up, I couldn't help it. I'm not trying to embarrass you, Jeff, but I couldn't help but think some of these images actually made me think of you. So for example, now he's going to get embarrassed. He's turning red. I can see it right there. But think about it. How many of the exhibits are showing a Sybil or a prophet with a book? There's a book in almost everybody's hand but God's in these exhibits. Look at that. And Jeff shares this characteristic of being a friend of the book and loving to read and study. And then I was thinking I'm looking at the panel of separating the darkness from the lightness. Isn't that what educators do? Seriously, they get students in who are all confused and muddled, and everything's gray, and they clarify. They separate the darkness from the light, the chaff from the wheat. And then you've got, he's getting more and more embarrassed. You can see, this is a test. This is the first time he's giving a speech from this, so this is a test for him, and he's going to rise to the challenge here. But rather than my going on any longer, because I always learn when I listen to Jeff. He is a wonderful speaker and scholar and thinker. My friend, Jeff Polet, please join us.
Well, I would normally thank Gleaves or whoever is introducing me for the kind introduction, but he's put an extraordinary amount of pressure on me here, and I'm not sure I can live up to that. But I am thrilled to be here, and I am thrilled to be part of the Ford Foundation. I grew up here in West Michigan, and you know, this is home for me, and there are these sorts of West Michigan values I think that this foundation embodies really well. So thank you, Gleaves. Abby, Amy, Lauren, and Rachel, thank you to all of you as well for your work with the foundation. It's a little intimidating for me to give the keynote speech for this series. The main reason is I'm not an artist, and anybody who knows me knows I am not an artist. And I'm not a professor of aesthetics. It's not my field at all. I'm a professor of political philosophy. And so I've mentioned two bad words, political and philosophy. And that is going to be what I'm speaking about tonight. The title of my speech is Why Not by Bread Alone, Why Beauty Matters. And I want to kind of build off what Gleaves said a little bit. And that is to say that it may not seem obvious that we should have an exhibit about the Sistine Chapel in a presidential museum. And it seems even less obvious in America, a nation where we often talk about separation of church and state, to have sacred art in a public museum, in a museum run by the National Archives. And this seems a little strange to us, I think. So what are we doing here? And what does church art have to do with the American presidency? Well, that's the challenge I've put forward for myself. And I'm going to take on that challenge, and hopefully you will join me in that. I'm going to begin speaking, and you'll begin listening, and hopefully we'll end at roughly the same time. Okay, as practical Americans, we can't help but wonder why beauty matters at all, particularly in a time of economic distress, social unrest, wars and rumors of wars, vicious factionalism, and the weakness and collapse of our social institutions. We have real problems to deal with, and those problems don't admit of the distractions and illusions we might associate with beauty. Who can indulge thoughts about beauty when we fear for our daily bread? In Matthew chapter 4, Jesus, after having fasted in the desert for 40 days, faces 3 temptations. The devil begins tempting Jesus in the most immediate way: turn the stones into bread and feed yourself. But Jesus resists. Quoting the book of Deuteronomy, he replies, "Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God." But what is this word? And do we have the capacity to hear it? This dramatic interaction between Jesus and the devil occupies only 11 verses in the Christian scripture, but becomes the backdrop for Dostoevsky's extensive treatment in his Legend of the Grand Inquisitor from his brothers Karamazov. The trial in the desert is transformed by Dostoevsky into a legal trial, with Jesus standing accused by the Inquisitor. His crime? He refused to give human beings the bread they craved, but instead burdened them with the gift of freedom. And it was this gift for which Jesus was condemned to death. Ivan Karamazov's telling of the story contrasts Christ's beauty with the Inquisitor's lust for power. It was the same author, Dostoevsky, in his work The Idiot, who proclaimed that beauty will save the world. The prince, the title figure of the book, is mocked for believing this adage. And indeed, the story does not end well for him. But that too was part of Dostoevsky's story, to help us understand how suffering is transfigured into beauty, and that this transfiguration is genuine power. Nietzsche observed that with beauty such as that, one might overthrow the world. This beauty directs our attention not simply to things in their outward form, but toward what's inside them. And such a new mode of seeing is a sensation that brings with it deep joy and ecstatic devotion. In the classical tradition, beauty is held to be one of the 3 transcendentals. This is where I'm doing some philosophy here. Fundamental realities that are so deep and profound they transcend all specific appearances in the world, but also govern them. Along with truth and goodness, beauty is both beyond and within things. A thing is beautiful when it has beauty in it, or truthful when it contains truth in it. The search for truth is the province of the philosopher, and the good is the interest of the statesman, while beauty is the realm of the artist. A well-ordered society has the philosopher, statesman, and artist working harmoniously with each other. Alexander Solzhenitsyn, the Russian emigre, dedicated his Nobel Prize address to meditating on the phrase, "Beauty will save the world." In this address, he wrote, quote, "The artist recognizes above himself a higher power and joyfully works as a humble apprentice under God's heaven. Though graver and more demanding still is his responsibility for all he writes or paints, and for the souls which apprehend it. However, it was not he who created this world, nor does he control it. There can be no doubts about its foundations. It is merely given to the artist to sense more keenly than others the harmony of the world, the beauty and ugliness of man's role in it, and to vividly communicate this to mankind. Even amid failure and at the lower depths of existence, in poverty, in prison, and in illness, a sense of enduring harmony cannot abandon him." End quote. This keen sense of the inner harmony of the world is cultivated by beauty. We experience this when our attention is arrested by something beautiful. It is both full in itself, but also suggestive of mysteries higher and deeper. Take, for example, the Urlicht of Mahler's Second Symphony. The Grand Rapids Symphony is doing it tomorrow night, so I thought I'd use this as an example. The mezzo solo on Ja, lieber möcht ich im Himmel sein is sung in an ascending scale, one that becomes both more ethereal and gentle and soft as her voice rises, bringing a note of consolation in the midst of her plangent cry. As she pauses, we hear an oboe float over the orchestra, fashioning a phrase of indescribable longing and beauty. It is beautiful in itself, but it also suggests that it contains more than it can communicate to us at that moment. Within the sound, we capture a hint of another voice calling out to us from the vasty deep. The beyond has spoken to us. We have become aware of the totality of something. Precisely because the beautiful is meaningful in itself, something that can neither be commodified or made use of, it reveals to us an essence. In reflective and receptive contemplation, we touch, briefly, remotely, the core of all things, the ultimate hidden reason of the universe, the pure form of all that is, of the essence of reality itself. To know beauty requires of us receptive openness and attentive silence, and it asks reverence of us. I am arguing here that beauty is not in the eye of the beholder, but in the thing beheld. And that thing makes a claim on those who enter its presence. It demands of them reverence, wonder, openness, respect, gratitude, and ultimately love. And this movement from receptive openness to love forms our character. Surely this is behind Rainer Maria Rilke's reflection in his poem, Archaic Torso of Apollo. Here's the poem. We cannot know his legendary head with eyes like ripening fruit, and yet his torso is still suffused with brilliance from inside like a lamp in which his gaze, now turned low, gleams in all its power. Otherwise, the curved breast could not dazzle you so, nor could a smile run through the placid hips and thighs to that dark center where procreation flared. Otherwise, this stone would seem defaced beneath the translucent cascade of the shoulders and would not glisten like a wild beast's fur, would not from all the borders of itself burst like a star. For here, there is no place that does not see you. You must change your life. The last line strikes us as odd. We might see how the true or the good might require us to change, but beauty? Is it beauty, whatever we make of it, and thus an extension of what we already are, rather than an invitation to change ourselves? Thomas Aquinas, in his meditation on beauty, observed that beauty is the first movement of the will, and love transforms the will, so the soul is transformed by the object on which it contemplates, by beauty itself. This relationship between beauty and the cultivation of our capacity to love is well captured by, surprisingly, Nietzsche. He writes this: "One must learn to love. This is what happens to us in music. First, one has to learn to hear a figure in melody at all, to detect and distinguish it, to isolate it and delimit it as a separate life. Then it requires some exertion and goodwill to tolerate it in spite of its strangeness, to be patient with its appearance and expression, and kind-hearted about its oddity. Finally, there comes a moment when we are used to it, when we wait for it, when we sense that we should miss it if it were missing. And now it continues to compel and enchant us relentlessly until we have become its humble and enraptured lovers who desire nothing better from the world than it and only it." But that is what happens to us not only in music. That is how we have learned to love all things that we now love. In the end, we are always rewarded for our goodwill, our patience, fair-mindedness, and gentleness with what is strange. Gradually, it sheds its veil and turns out to be a new and indescribable beauty. That is its thanks for our hospitality. Even those who love themselves will have learned it this way, for there is no other way. Love, too, has to be learned. This receptive openness, demanding that we change our lives, asks a lot of us. We want to avert our eyes. We are afraid of beauty because we are disturbed by love. And living in a loveless culture, we try to deny beauty its capacity to pull us up and out of ourselves. It takes courage to keep looking at something that makes us uncomfortable. We try to domesticate it or tame it. More to the point, since beauty is tied intimately to sacred things, and it is in the presence of sacred things that we are judged. In order to escape judgment, we must destroy the thing that seems to accuse us. And this too goes to Rilke's point. In the presence of the work of art, we have nowhere to hide. We stand accused. We become penitents. On the other hand, the attitude of receptive openness and attentive silence results by progressive chain of character formation into goodwill and patience, fair-mindedness and gentleness with what is strange, all marks of a good society. That society is opposed by a retreat into the self, the conviction that beauty at best offers us only pleasurable sensations. But in any case, its truth, to the degree that it has one, rests in the subject alone. This reduction of the experience of beauty to pleasant sensations has its analog in reducing truth to opinion or point of view, or reducing the good to moral relativism. And here, I think, we can build on Dostoevsky's point. The search for truth is grounded in the very skepticism that can be its own undoing. And the rigor of the search means that only very few can engage in it. The good is morally demanding, and in a fallen world, we can easily become confused concerning what the good requires of us. But the experience of beauty carries within it its own justification, and its appeal is universal. It's open to everyone. We can't count on the good and the true to save us when our culture goes sideways. Their appeal is too limited, their details too complex, and are easily eroded by doubt and cynicism. But we can hold out hope for beauty. Indeed, accepting the premise that much of modern art aims to destroy beauty, the inability of modern art to get any cultural purchase is testimony to beauty's enduring appeal. Not that we can't make the effort to suppress beauty. Indeed, we seem to be a culture in many ways committed to the lie, to violence, to the ugly. In some ways, however, it's not ugliness that is beauty's main rival. No, its rival is that which borrows off beauty's capital, passing itself off as having an equal claim to beauty. It's propaganda, kitsch, ostentation, and pornography that degrade beauty. Let me back up a second. There are four kinds of beauty we might want to consider. Human beauty, which connects to erotic desire. Natural beauty, which connects to sublimity and contemplation. Artistic beauty, which connects to forms of meaning and appreciation for which has to be patiently cultivated, precisely because it involves craftsmanship in a way that natural beauty does not. Consider, for example, the skill involved in painting a curved vault more than 60 feet above the ground. Michelangelo had his nose to the ceiling, and what's more, to the pendentives that connect the round dome to the square building, and had to figure out how the figures he was painting would look from floor level. I don't think it's easy for us to imagine the skill it takes to paint figures on curved surfaces so they don't look distorted from below. Nor can we fully appreciate the artistic integrity involved in painting the ceiling of the chapel to begin with. Julius II had originally commissioned a painting of the 12 Apostles, which Michelangelo had begun. And even though he didn't consider himself a painter, and frankly didn't care for the medium of painting, he scrapped the original plan. Having retired to the mountains, looking out over a sunset, and having experienced a vision of creation in all its glory, Michelangelo revealed his new plan to the perplexed Pope. He was going to paint the creation. And here I'm quoting Michelangelo. "If there's one thing I know for sure, it's that when I hold a hammer and chisel in my hands and start that go, I need my full assurance that I can do no wrong. I need my complete self-respect. Once let me know that I can be content with inferior work, and as an artist, I am through." The artist, as Flannery O'Connor said, must meet the demands of both the thing being seen and the thing being made. An artist can be an egoist in life, but not in art. Which is why ostentation is bad for art, because the artist is primarily interested in drawing attention to himself, a habit especially pronounced in much of modern architecture, where the artist either leaves his imprint on the cityscape no matter the cost, and I'm thinking about Frank Gehry here. If you've been to Chicago and you've seen Soldier Field, you know what he did to that place. Or is so indifferent to the thing being made that it can serve no public audience. Compare, for example, the civic space created by visiting the Lincoln Memorial, with its open vistas, its broad approaches, its accessibility, its view of the Washington cityscape, and its transparency as one approaches the great seated figure, first glimpsed from afar and gradually brought into close relief. Its monumental style clearly conveys meaning and tells a story in such a way that it creates a shared public space, and thus shared public meanings that communicate in our interactions with and in those spaces that we are a government by, for, and of the people. Contrast that with the hideous City Hall in Boston, with its brutalist style, its clunky design, its perch between major thoroughfares. And if traffic weren't deterrent enough, the entrances to the building are both above street level and obscured by brick facades. There is no visible point of entry into the Boston City Hall. The message is clear to the people of Boston. We don't want you in here. The demolition of the Lincoln Memorial would be greeted with lament, that of the Boston City Hall with cheers and huzzas. Ostentation may be bad, but it's a minor sin compared to kitsch. Art-like products designed to produce sentimental effects. Kitsch may please and soothe, but it will never inspire. And in any case, it never aspires to be anything more than a consumer product. The studio of Thomas Kincaid has been producing profitable kitsch for decades because the people who buy it think that it seems maybe sophisticated and perhaps even valuable. But in any case, it's comfortable, which art must never be. Its main crime is its sentimentalism, kitsch's main crime. And no one understood the consequences of sentimentalism better than Flannery O'Connor, who noted that, quote, "sentimentality is an excess, a distortion of sentiment, usually in the direction of an overemphasis on innocence. And that innocence, whenever it is overemphasized in the ordinary human condition, tends by some natural law to become its opposite." Roca's message that true art requires us to change is in part a warning against pursuing art's opposite. As O'Connor famously stated later in the same book, Mystery and Manners, that, quote, "while other ages felt less, they saw more, even though they saw with the blind, prophetical, unsentimental eye of acceptance," which is to say, of faith. In the absence of this faith now, we govern by tenderness. When tenderness is detached from the source of tenderness, its logical outcome is terror. It ends in forced labor camps and in the fumes of the gas chambers. end quote. Kitsch and gulags go together, because in sentimentalizing people, we don't see them for what they really are. They become dolls to us, and one minute we will smother them with kisses, and the next tear them to shreds. Which is why pornography, as O'Connor observed, is another mode of sentimentalism. As she wrote, it leaves out the connection of sex with its hard purpose, and so far disconnects it from meaning in life as to simply make it an experience for its own sake. Pornography invites us to see other people not in their humanity, but as objects for our gratification. But beauty forbids voyeurism. It removes veils of hesitation. It experiences no shame. Beauty, therefore, is an always good and valid and heightened form of experience. Things are allowed to flower in accordance with their inner need. I said earlier there were 4 types of beauty. If you were listening closely, you realize I only said 3 of them. I'm going to mention the 4th one now. So what I'm going to call everyday beauty, the measures and gestures by which we gild our lives. We set a table. We make food visually appealing as well as tasty. We clean our houses. We cut our grass evenly. If we are building something, we want to make sure all the corners are just so. When woodworking, we want the grain to show. We even gild ourselves. All this too, bad time to stop. All this too is a testimony to attend to things in their fullness, to demonstrate a care and an urge to preserve born of love. It results in a rightful pride we experience when something is done just so. And this just so-ness is much of what art offers us. Good art aspires to fittedness, which is why proportion and symmetry matter to it. Now, there'd been many ways to paint the creation of Adam, but Michelangelo wanted us to see art as itself an act of creation, that in creating, we are imitating our Creator. And thus the final act of creating man is the transfer of that divine spark, the divine act to us. The dust has been breathed into. We've become inspired. Likewise, the Last Judgment reveals much of not only his artistic vision, the conflicting modes of ascent and descent, along with the diagonal of the composition that connects heaven in the top left to hell at the bottom right, but also his theological vision. Christ appears 3 times in the painting. Once, center bottom, on the cross, in the shadow of death and at the mouth of hell. A second time, in the upper left, unseated in heaven. And most dramatically in the center, as the judge who separates the sheep from the goats. Look down immediately by Christ's left foot, and you'll see St. Bartholomew holding a knife in his right hand and the flayed skin of Michelangelo in his left. As an artist, Michelangelo knew that in the presence of sacred beauty, sublime in its terror, he could not escape judgment. Since philosophers began meditating on beauty, they've observed that it is a power that draws us unto itself. It reveals itself suggestively, and invites us into a relationship with it. It gives us hints of inexhaustible mystery, and we realize we could spend our whole lives in its presence and never get to the bottom of it. It is this way also with those we love. And it's why beauty is different than prettiness. Prettiness is skin deep. But a beautiful face, Dostoevsky observed, has character marked by suffering, and thus carries itself with grace. The love resulting from beauty cracks our souls open. It opens our hearts by opening our eyes and our ears. Plato argued that beauty gave the soul wings, and Augustine argued that it gave the soul weight, but they were saying much the same thing. Beauty was the pulley that lifted us out of the morass of existence, the blue and buzzing confusion and meanness of social life with its restlessness and competition and inducements to love gone wrong. When we encounter beauty, we experience permanence and qualities that endure and ascend. Our response is silent, reposeful, respectful, at one with ourselves and with others. The weightiness of beauty is, Augustine said, love itself. Quoting here from Book 13 of the Confessions, in your gift we rest, there we enjoy you. Our rest is our place. Love lifts us up there, and your good spirit lifts our lowliness from the gates of death. In your good pleasure lies our peace. The body by its own weight gravitates toward its own place. Weight goes not downward only, but to its own place. Fire tends upward, a stone downwards. They are propelled by their own weights. They seek their own places. Out of order, they are restless. Restored to order, they are at rest. My weight is my love. By it, I am borne to wherever I am borne. By your gift, we are inflamed and are borne upwards. We wax hot inwardly and go forwards. We ascend your ways that be in our heart and sing a song of degrees. We glow inwardly with your fire, with your good fire, and we go because we go upwards to the peace of Jerusalem. Beauty offers us an answer to the riddle of existence by presenting us with a gift that carries a message to us. It is an insight into true order, a revelation from beyond that transforms us and that alone can satisfy human needs. As Roger Scruton wrote, quote, in the last analysis, there is as much objectivity in our judgments of beauty as there is in our judgments of virtue and vice. Beauty is therefore as firmly rooted in the scheme of things as is goodness. It speaks to us of human fulfillment, not of things we want, but of things we ought to want, because human nature requires them. Judgments concerning a reality that transcends all of us create unity, since we are directed outside of ourselves to a common reality. Once we have the experience of beauty, we want more of it. We want to be able to see things in their totality and in their connectedness. Beauty's difficulty rests in part in this. You can try to argue someone into the truth and try to persuade or compel someone to do what is right, but you can't make that person believe something is beautiful unless she has experienced it as such. That shared experience creates a new bond, a deeper union of souls, a greater understanding result from standing under beauty's spell. We become fuller selves for having shared it, building and preserving a world alongside others. And we sense that a world that can make room for beautiful things can also make room for us. The truth of this claim is found in its breach. When we discover and discuss something we find beautiful, we are justifying a verdict that we've already rendered. And it wounds us when someone we are close to doesn't share that judgment. Like, I'm sure you've all had that. You know, a joke you think is somebody funny, somebody else is like, a movie you really like, somebody else doesn't like, you know. That's like, you take it personally, right? The relationship has been disrupted, not simply because the judgment isn't shared, but because we assume the other person must be deaf or blind to have missed the beauty of the thing. It's not their taste you're questioning, nor even their reason. It's the quality of their soul. Unlike the goods of this world, beauty increases when it is shared. You wonder what kind of person would refuse the revelation of a mystery, a glimpse of eternity, an invitation to what Dostoevsky called a complete life, the highest synthesis. Given beauty's relationship to character, an inability to experience the former implies a deficiency in the latter. I had been to the Sistine Chapel, by the way, with a close friend of mine. And it's an odd experience because it's packed in there. And nobody's allowed to speak or take pictures. The only thing you can hear are the Italian guards constantly yelling "Silencio." And my we're looking at this, and I'm just sort of awestruck by the whole thing. My friend says at one point, it's too cartoonish. Okay. Here also, we approach a mystery. Why are some able to hear the call from beyond and others not? Why do some people respond to the pull of beauty and others not? This necessarily brings us, as Plato knew, into the realm of theology, and as Aquinas claimed, into the mystery of grace. Pope Paul VI, in his letter to the artists, wrote this: "Art must make perceptible, and as far as possible, attractive, the world of the Spirit, of the invisible, of God. It must therefore translate into meaningful terms that which is in itself ineffable. Art has a unique capacity to take one or another facet of the message and translate it into colors, shapes, and sounds which nourish the intuition of those who look or listen. It does so without emptying the message itself of its transcendent value and its aura of mystery." Many artists recognize this. They have been inspired, literally breathed into. They do not live by bread alone, but they bring us the word that comes from the mouth of God. A poem by the Dutch poet Van Eyck describes the birth pains that accompany the creative act. Oft tired of labor never bearing fruit, a poet's will is never absolute. I think how, with an unsuspected flight, allowed by grace which rarely breaks the night, the soul at once extends its mighty wings, inerrantly creating beauteous things. And then the breath is stopped before the face. God speaks in human tongue with open grace. The poet sets his life upon a strict command, so that a perfect poem at last may stand. Now, Nietzsche had said about the Greek tragedians, "Oh, how much they must have suffered to have been capable of such great beauty." Likewise, Van Eyck recognized the inner dynamic connecting suffering to beauty. For to him who suffered through the flame, the hour comes and poet is his name. Michelangelo deserves his reputation as being perhaps the greatest artist in Western history. His ceiling attempted a creation that could rival but never equal God's own. To be captured by beauty is not to engage in a healthy departure from this world, nor to court illusion. Beauty invites us to go ever deeper. And it's like looking at a church with beautiful stained glass windows. If you're outside the church, they're dark and opaque, but if you're inside the church, right, they're translucent, they light up, they make sense, right? They're images that speak to us, right? You have to be inside of it to really understand it. And beauty invites us to go ever deeper. Just as we can never get too much truth or too much goodness, we can't get too much beauty. These three, truth, goodness, beauty, make our hearts all the more receptive to their unity, for they all have the same source. And this seems an important part of Rilke's admonition at the end of his poem. Pursuing beauty brings us further into the moral sphere, and that's why it matters. And that's why it matters to statesmen, and that's why it matters to philosophers, and that's why the three need each other. As Solzhenitsyn observed, it is precisely when the true and the good have become suspect that we need beauty the most. And that's why beauty can save the world. In his Nobel Prize address, Solzhenitsyn wrote, "If the tops of these three trees do converge, as thinkers used to claim, and if the all too obvious and overly straight sprouts of truth and goodness have been crushed, cut down, and not permitted to grow, then perhaps the whimsical, unpredictable, and ever-surprising shoots of beauty will force their way through and soar up to that very spot, thereby fulfilling the task of all three. When the glories of this world have been paved over with the asphalt of human indifference and wantonness, beauty will find a way to grow through the cracks. We do not think the kingdom of God. We feel it, hear it, see it, taste it, imagine it. It overwhelms us. It invites us to see things in their fluorescence and to experience the true and the good and the beautiful in their fullness without ever wearying of them. It's what we crave. Michelangelo may well have said it best. Beauty was given to me at my birth as the true model for my dual calling as sculptor and as painter. It is both a light and a mirror for me in both art forms. Whoever thinks otherwise is mistaken. For beauty alone inspires me to envision the sublimity of the conceptions I undertake to paint and sculpt. While insolent and foolish people concoct a false notion of beauty, reducing it to the level of their senses, beauty comes from heaven and will lead any sane spirit to the place from whence it came. Thank you. I think we have some time for questions and answers, if anybody has any. Well, for questions at least. I don't know if there will be answers. I can't promise them. Again, I'm not an art critic, so just want to make that really clear. Any questions? That means it was either completely clear and intelligible or completely unclear and unintelligible, one of the two. I'm not sure which. In fact, it was 82% clear and intelligible. Okay.
Why do you think, we just listened to the producer of this incredible exhibit explain why he has had 10 units that are just like what you're seeing up here, traveling around the world at the same time. There's a huge demand for a Sistine Chapel. Why is that in today's postmodern world?
Let me venture a guess at that. I can't speak for everybody, of course, who attends these exhibits. Modern art largely dedicated itself to the destruction of beauty. Right? It was largely a movement directed against beauty. And so we don't have art that enriches our lives. We don't have art that staggers us or dazzles us. Sometimes we do, but the German poet Goethe once said that no one who has not seen the Sistine Chapel has any idea what human beings are capable of. And it's a staggering achievement. So I think when you live in a world that has been flattened, right? So this is in political science, this is the term of art that's been bandied around for the world is flat. Right? I mean, this kind of global hegemonic society. It's hard for things to poke above it. It's hard for people to poke above it. It's hard for art to poke above it. In a lot of ways, the whole idea of art has become corrupted. Albert Camus wrote a terrific essay on modern art where he discusses just how the whole artistic effort has been corrupted in all these different ways. So I think you have a couple of things going on. One is people want beauty in their lives, right? It's an ugly world in a lot of ways. And we're not very good at producing beauty. We are pretty good at producing ugliness. And like beauty, like I said, beauty doesn't have to be comfortable, right? I mean, it can be brutal. But what a great artist will do is in the middle of suffering and brutality and so forth, will find the redemptive moment in there, the beautiful moment in there. Right? And this is what Dostoevsky was so great at, what Solzhenitsyn was so great. There's a great passage in Solzhenitsyn's novel One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich, where right, he's in the Gulag, he's in the Soviet prison camp, and he's a bricklayer. He wasn't a bricklayer in his previous life, but he was a carpet maker in his previous life. But in the prisons, he's a bricklayer. And it's Siberia, right? And they're building a wall. And you know the way Solzhenitsyn kind of describes it is really interesting because it's like, what's even the point of the wall? Why would you build a wall in Siberia? You know, what's it containing? What's it doing? Like we're not even told what the wall really does. Shukov, Ivan Denisovich, is working on the wall, and he realizes that the guy who had been laying bricks there earlier in the day had been sloppy in his job. And he says, nope, we're starting all over again, and we're going to do this the right way. And it's a remarkable moment, I think, in that novel, because there's absolutely no reward for him whatsoever to build this wall the right way. In fact, he's freezing, right? It's 30 below or whatever, and everybody just wants to get back, but he's like, nope, let's stay here, get this job done, and get this job done right. Now, I think the reason why Solzhenitsyn put that in the novel is precisely this, and that is that human beings need order. We need beauty in our lives. And so I think this combination of a kind of flattened world, what were the odds I was going to make it through the night without mentioning Tocqueville? This kind of flattened democratic society that Tocqueville talks about, which has no degree. You know, Augustine uses that word degree, right? And the degree means ranking or hierarchy. You know, as Shakespeare says in Troilus and Cressida, take but degree away and watch what happens, right? It all lust into power, power into will, will into appetite, right? It all falls apart. Right, there's a human hunger there. I mean, there's a genuine human need. You can't really change human nature in that sense. You can, you know, kind of pop it. It's cheering to me that people are doing this, right? I think it's a testimony to no matter how many different ways we try to suppress this urge and impulse that human beings have that keeps popping up. And he was talking at dinner about the success they've had in China with this, you know, interesting. Does that answer your question? Maybe more than you wanted, I don't know. Yeah. Go ahead, yep.
All right. I'm a professor of history, so you'll indulge me if I ask a few questions. You mentioned Augustine Aquinas. Have you taken the sayings of these people out of context, or do you believe there is a timelessness of beauty, that idea that you brought up throughout your talk?
No, I did not do that. I'm innocent of the charge. That's what they believed. Right? You know, book 10 of the Confessions, Augustine has this kind of paean to beauty that he engages in. I mean, they didn't believe by that beauty was static, but they did believe it was part of what God is. Yeah. Here, yeah.
What sort of explanations were attached to the exhibit in China? How do they describe it?
The gentleman who ran the exhibits doesn't read Chinese, so so he didn't know. He was just fairly confident that they weren't the same. Yeah, so I don't know the answer to that. In the back, gentleman in the back there. Well, it helps the people who have hearing aids if you use the microphone.
Distressed by your concept of modern art, do you think the Sistine Chapel would have been done as it was done with what tools are available to him today if it was to be done again?
Boy, I don't think that's a question I could possibly answer. I mean, art is of its time. It is of its time and its place. It's an instantiation of beauty, but it's not beauty itself. And so the artist is working with whatever tools he or she has available to him or her at that particular time. I do know with The Last Judgment that Michelangelo had not an apprentice, somebody that he was working with, who had done a kind of revolution in oil colors and had prepped the wall of the chapel with to make it an oil painting. And Michelangelo went in and said, "I'm a Florentine. I don't do oil painting. I do frescoes." And so they tore down everything, and then they had to let everything dry out, and it like set the whole project back 9 months or something like that. I mean, right? Flannery O'Connor writes in English. That English is not an eternal language. If there were any poets or fiction writers who wrote in Frisian, maybe they got close to writing in an eternal language, but otherwise, yeah, right. I mean, you have to operate in the time that you're in. So I have no idea what it would look like if you were to do something like that today.
Thank you, Jeff,
Yeah.
for a lot of excellent ideas. You suggested that the yearning for beauty is something that comes spontaneously from the human soul, but you're also an educator. Do you think it's possible in a culture for us to understand beauty without being taught about it? These days, teaching about art is somewhat taboo. It's okay to make art, it's okay to look at art, but for anybody to stand up and say, this is what the art says, is sort of not good courtesy. Do you think it's possible for a culture, those who participate in a culture, to share art together without being taught about art?
Okay, so to the last part of that question, I'd say yes. I think Nick Walterstorff, for example, has written quite a bit about that, and that is there's a kind of spontaneous artistry that you can find in culture. Singing in the fields is a kind of shared artistic experience that people engage in. So yeah, I think human beings have a natural proclivity to it, right? So just by way of disclosure, Dr. Vandergood's a former professor of mine with whom I took developmental psychology in college, and now I'm going to do some developmental psychology here. So we'll see how well I learned the lesson 10 years ago when I was in college. But you would know this better than I do, that I think infants are, right, they respond to song, right? They respond to movement and rhythm and so forth. I think that's this kind of natural proclivity that we as human beings have for it. So I would answer the question in the affirmative, and then I would say that's something different yet than aesthetic judgment is. Is it Oscar Wilde or George Bernard Shaw who said that a critic is a person who knows the price of everything and the value of nothing. But however else aesthetic judgment works, it works by being able to connect something we have seen or heard into a wider range of things that we have seen or heard. And I think that's part of the Nietzschean idea there, right? That we kind of broaden our horizons, and when we broaden our horizons, we broaden our capacity to make judgments. So I think there is an idea in which we can cultivate our not only our appreciation for it, but our understanding of it. But there is a sense in which I think you can say, okay, I think I get that. Right? I think I understand it. I perceive the inner meaning of the piece. I think I understand what the artist was trying to do here and so forth, and still not love it. Or still not find it beautiful. So I think the experience of beauty is different, because aesthetic understanding or aesthetic judgments operate at a kind of critical and therefore distanced level. Right? I mean, there's a kind of critical distance that you're putting between yourself and the work of art. But the experience of beauty never operates at a critical distance. Right? You're subordinated to it. Right? You're kind of lost in it. And I think that hopefully most people in here have had that sort of experience, right? Where you're at a, I vividly recall being at a concert once, and they're playing Brahms' Fourth Symphony. I'm listening to the second movement of Brahms' Fourth Symphony, and it's like you've ceased to exist completely, right? You're just completely absorbed into the music. And that's a different experience than the sort of critical aesthetic experience. I mean, education is a latecomer on the scene. I think you can cultivate a kind of capacity for it. I don't even know if that answered the question. It's, yeah.
Let's go, Professor.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jeff. That was just wonderfully enlightening, and what a lot of material for us to think about. I mean, this is like going back to graduate school and college. It was, it's where you need the tape recorder to capture the thought, and of course this will be available to you in video, so you can go back and enjoy it. Now, this is the kind of thing we hope to do through several of our series called Evenings to Remember. And next Wednesday, for example, Wednesday evening on the 25th, we're going to have Henry Luedekhuizen from Calvin University come and give a perspective on Michelangelo and the difficulties he willingly tackled. It'll be a great compliment to what you've heard from Dr. Polet this evening. And then after that, we have, a week after that, we have Duncan Stroik coming from the University of Notre Dame. He's a great architectural critic and architect himself, who understands the marriage of art and architecture. So he'll be 2 weeks from tonight. And later in the summer, we'll have Liz Lev, August 18th, who is go watch her TED Talk on the Sistine Chapel. It's wonderful. I'll give you a little foretaste of the feast to come. So we have a series of talks that continue to enrich you. If this is the kind of thing that you value, if you feel challenged, if you feel that you've grown this evening, if your mind has been stretched, then this is a successful evening. And we hope that you will spread the word and have more people become friends of Ford so that they can enjoy quality talks like this evening. They're insightful and enlightening. I just want to say a couple of things in conclusion. Thanks again to Brooke and her team at the Ford Presidential Museum. We couldn't do any of this without you. You did a great job. And also would like to tell you that the tradition continues. We are back. The tradition continues. There are going to be cookies out there. You've earned your keep. These French scientists did all kinds of metabolic studies, and they said that when you're thinking really hard, you can burn up to 700 calories an hour. So you need to refuel. So this is a great weight loss plan. Come to the Ford for weight loss. But we have cookies out there, and the museum will continue to be open for what, till about 2 a.m.? No, big trouble. I think for another half hour or so. So enjoy the exhibits and more, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you so much. And was there anything else, Brooke, did I get all the, okay, we got it. Thanks so much. Drive home safely.